What is up, BHB family? This is Coach Coop, and I am actually sitting down right now with none other than JJ Virgin. JJ is a certified nutrition specialist, a board certified holistic nutrition practitioner, a certified exercise physiologist. JJ actually specializes in helping people age 40 and up for the most part, although she does help everyone, lose the weight and keep it off so they look better, feel better than ever. JJ is actually a published author of multiple books, including a forthcoming one. JJ has been really doing this since the 80s. She was actually traveling around teaching aerobics. She was one of the first really well-known trainers out here in LA. And since then, not only has she evolved, but her understanding of health and nutrition has gone beyond the typical, just vaguely eat clean or, watch your calories kind of stuff that was out there before. And today she's actually going to talk to us about how stress can impact your physique, your health, how food intolerance could be holding you back, the importance of things like electrolytes, cravings, and a whole lot more. I'm really looking forward to introducing you guys to her. I think you're going to love her and really, really, truly get a lot out of this episode. Also, this episode is brought to you by Real Ketones. Real Ketones are the pioneers in the exogenous ketone space. And for those of you who haven't tried exogenous ketones yet, they are literally like the superfood of nutritional supplements. Their benefits include health and wellness, brain function and focus, anxiety and stress relief, exercise, performance, energy, immunity. I mean, the benefits just literally keep going and going and going. And part of that's because research is uncovering new ones all the time. So be sure to check them out at realketones.com. In addition to that, they're not just another nutritional supplement company. They also care. They want to make sure you guys get the results that you need. So when you go on there, you can also feel free to check out their plans, their guides, their articles, and a whole lot more. They're dedicated to making sure that you're not only getting success in the short term, but also able to successfully transition into a healthy lifestyle. Be sure to check them out at Real Ketones on all major social media platforms as well. All right, guys, without further ado, let's get this show on the road. Good evening, everyone. This is Coach Matt, and you are listening to Better Health and Body Radio, your source for the latest and greatest information and understanding in the world of health, nutrition, and performance, where we give you a seat at the table next to the best and the brightest minds to arm you with the information you need to optimize yourself. Join us for another exciting, thought-provoking episode of BHB Radio, starting now. JJ, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time now.
Oh boy, the pressure.
I'm really buttering you up here. So the pressure to perform,
gosh.
The hype is like Michael Jordan-esque.
Man, I'm a little stressed now.
Well, to put you at ease, let's start with a softball question. How did you get into what you're doing for people who may not know?
I've been into this since I was in my teens. So literally, I think now I'm into 40 years plus of being obsessed with health and nutrition. So I've seen a lot of different stuff, Matt, over the years. I mean, I was one of the first personal trainers. It was me, Body by Jake and Mark Sisson.
Yeah.
I started doing nutrition back when you had to be a dietitian in a hospital. Who wants to do that? It sounds no fun, especially now. So, it's just been this process of creating what's ever next based on what people are asking for, all in this bold desire to avoid having to work in an office with a job.
That's kind of funny. That's what I tell people. I'm like, they ask what I do, and then I always finish it with just trying not to get a real job as long as I can.
My mom's like, are you ever going to get a job with benefits? I'm like, Mom, I have my own benefits.
Same.
Right?
There's definitely a trade-off there. But when you kind of line up with your purpose, it's like I don't know, the risk, quote unquote, involved just seems so like a no-brainer. It's like you couldn't imagine any other way.
I don't know. To me, the biggest risk is doing something that doesn't make a difference in the world that you don't love and spending your life doing it.
Exactly. I think that's bad for your health. I think that ages you. Speaking of, the topics we're going to talk about today.
Yes. All my favorite topics.
There you go. So I did want to ask you, you've got quite a bit of material out there for people, from an amazing website full of educational content, books, so on and so forth. Specifically, one that I think a lot of our audience is going to be drawn to is Warrior Mom. So I wanted to ask, what inspired you to write that, and what is a warrior mom? Who is a warrior mom?
It's so funny that the book, that when I went to sell it to the publishers, they're like, wait a minute, you're a nutrition and fitness author. You don't talk about mindset. I'm like, I talk about mindset in every single book that I write. Like every program, it's the start to see your future self. So that was kind of funny. The book Warrior Mom, which, by the way, started out, you can change book names if you want to. It started out as Miracle Mindset. I republished it as Warrior Mom because it really dawned on me that, and it could be Warrior Dad too, that everyone will relate to that once you have kids, and you know that you will do whatever it takes to keep your kids healthy and safe. And so that book actually was inspired because when the Virgin Diet was coming out, my son Grant, who was 16, was in a very, very serious accident. In fact, so serious that the doctors told us that we needed to let him go. And we overruled the doctors. He had a torn aorta, and if that isn't repaired right away, I mean, 90% of the people have a torn aorta. For example, Princess Diana, they die on the scene. It ruptures, they're done. So his was hanging on by an onion skin. It had to be repaired, but he also had multiple brain bleeds. He was in a deep, deep coma, and the type of surgery he needed is super specialized. So we couldn't do it at the hospital he was at. And they kept saying, oh, he'll never survive the airlift to the next hospital. And even if he survived that, he wouldn't survive the surgery. And even if he survived that, he'd be so brain damaged, it wouldn't be worth it. I think any parent would be so offended. I was like looking at the doctor. My 15-year-old son, Bryce, was like, well, maybe a 0.25% chance he'd make it. And the doctor said yes. And, he said, well, we'll take those odds. It's not zero here at this hospital. So that book was really written to show not, what it took to get my son to survive, because we didn't ultimately have any control over that. He did. He's better than before the accident, but really good. The mindset that it takes to stand up to challenges, which is never more important than right now. It's like, the one thing we know for sure in life is that we are going to face challenges. And a big differentiator between people who are successful, and I think when you win at life, it's like you get to live life on your terms with the people you want to live it with, making the impact you want to make. The people who are successful are those people who, when things get hard, they double down. They don't wish it was easier. They make themselves stronger. They realize that they're never better than when they're challenged. And they have a mindset where they understand that the only limitations are the limitations in their mind, and that they just keep monitoring and improving that mindset every single day as if it was a muscle, so they can pull through it. Right.
Yeah. I love that. Now, on that note too, number one, I'm glad your son is okay now. I mean, most importantly.
Oh, he's better, by the way, like better than before. So it's possible.
Well, that's so funny. It's like every time that we go through or grow through something, it always seems like, you might not be able to see the how or the what or the why and the light at the end of the tunnel, but it always seems like we're better on the other side of it somehow.
I know, but you sure can't see that. Like, I will tell you that when Grant got hit, I didn't go, wow, I'm going to become such a better person because of this. I remember I was going through a real tough time, and one of my family members was like, but this will build character. I'm like, I don't want to have any better character at this point. It's strong. It's good enough. But it is true. It's hard to see in the middle of it. And that's why managing your mindset's so important, because it really, that's the part of the outcome you can control when things feel so out of control.
Got it. And I mean, so as far as crises go, I mean, that's easily an 11 out of 10 and then some. So what would you say to people who feel like they could never do what you did, who feel like they don't have what it takes to get through a major crisis in their lives, and maybe one that's also impacting their health too?
Right. If someone said, hey, here's what you're going to do. You're going to launch a book, The Virgin Diet Bedside, with your son in a coma, and you're going to help him get to be 110%. I'd be like, yeah, Right. Sure, I am. You know, it's easy to look at what someone else has done and go, I could never do that. It's amazing what you're capable of. Now, here's the thing. It's a way we view things that's going to make the difference. So let's say you're going through a challenging time. Every time you go through a challenging time, you get out of your comfort zone of what you know, of the known, the predictable, and you go into something unknown, scary that you don't think you really can do. When you go in there and you make it work, you make it happen, that comfort zone expands. Your, you know, what you believe you're capable of expands. The ultimate thing here is that truly the only limitations are the limitations in your mind. You're creating the limitations for yourself. So if you think you can't do it, you're right. But what if you thought you could? Right? So this is the big push that we just have to keep doing, is pushing ourselves beyond what we think is possible, continuing to, you know, push those limits for ourselves and doing that on a regular basis. The good news for me was I had a mentor at 30 who trained me on mindset. And by the time this crisis happened, I'd been through a lot of really traumatic experiences and tragedies. And so those trained me to be able to handle this, because every time you go through a challenging situation and you get back up again, you get stronger. And you get to the point where, like, now, you know, most of the things that come across my plate now that might absolutely floor somebody don't even register to me anymore because of how many challenging things I've gone through, right? It's like going to the gym and lifting 5-pound weights and then 10-pound weights and 15-pound weights. And then all of a sudden you're like, those 50s are nothing.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's like, you know, they barely register when you ask someone asks you to maybe move a weight or move something in the house that like might've struggled with before. I think that's a great analogy too, and I also think that both through health and then personal resolve, you can build up your stress currency, reserves, tolerance, whatever you want to call it. And then, you know, in the future, you're able to kind of remain calm in those moments. You know, it's almost like you still feel the feelings and the emotions and the weight of it all. But there's sort of a groundedness in that, you know, knowing that it's sort of like a wave that'll wash through, and, you know, you haven't lived enough life to know that everything that kind of happens to you have the opportunity to come out better from on the other side if you just open up to it.
Exactly. And you're like, I can get through this. I can get through this. And the other part of it is making sure that you have a group of people around you. You know, here's one of the things, Matt, I get asked all the time. How do I make sure that I don't regain my weight? How do I make sure that I've gotten to this level of fitness, I stay here? The single easiest way for you to ensure that you stay where you are or continue to improve is to find fitter friends. So if you're going through those challenging times, and maybe you tend to be negative, which you're fixing, just get around positive people.
Right. Actually, that's great. I was going to ask you next. Like, I do want to get to the Virgin Diet, you know, your next book, but I wanted to close, you know, Warrior Mom and the Mindset Talk out with, you know, just if people are listening and wondering, how do they start, you know, what can they do to start changing their mindset today? And it sounds like surrounding yourself with the right tribe is part of that.
It's definitely part of that. You are who you hang out with. You know, Jim Rohn said it, 40, 50 years ago, you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with. Choose wisely when you hear that, right? So hang out with negative people, you'll be negative, and you manage your environment. Pay attention to what you listen to. That mentor at 30 was like, you know, you are what you listen to. You are, you know, who you hang out with. You are what you read. So those are all things that you choose. So choose wisely on all of this stuff.
Right. Now, so with regards to the Virgin Diet too, the title of that one is The Virgin Diet: Drop 7 foods, lose 7 pounds, just 7 days. Why food intolerance is the real cause of weight gain. That's actually a topic we haven't delved into too much on this show that I think a lot of people would find useful. Is, you know, what is food intolerance? You know, how common is it?
Oh my gosh, you guys have not talked about food intolerance, Matt?
We've definitely talked about, I shouldn't say that. We've talked about it in like a broad brushstroke way. We just haven't had like a full on someone that was their specialty on here.
Let's go deep. So it's interesting, you know, this didn't start out as my specialty. I've always been obsessed with weight loss. What gets in the way of you losing weight or can cause you to gain weight? Like, to me, that's so fascinating. And I was on Dr. Phil as his weight loss nutritionist for 2 years during his weight loss challenges. He had a book chapter that was weight loss resistance. I'm like, weight loss resistance. Ooh. And at the time, all he was talking about was insulin resistance. So, what happens when you've got roller coaster blood sugar, your insulin receptors are desensitized, you've got higher insulin, you can't burn off fat. That was his whole thing. And I'm like, I think it really goes past that, right? There's so many other things that could get in the way of you losing weight or cause you to gain weight. Fortunately, I had like a bunch of test subjects because I had all these clients. So I was digging into all of this, and I was also just researching like crazy. Now, one of the things I was also doing was going around training doctors how to use lab testing in their practices. And one of the labs I was using was a food sensitivity test. And so here's what happened. And it's just so interesting. I would go in and teach them how to do that. We test their patients. Their patients would come in and they'd be complaining. Now, we want to use this test so people would become compliant on their diet. I know that if you use a test and people see results, they're way more compliant, right? So we were doing that to help people stay compliant on their diet. They were walking into these clinics complaining about headaches, fatigue, joint pain, skin problems, gas and bloating, inability to lose weight, food cravings, okay? We would run the test, and the test took 3 weeks to get back. So at first we'd run the test, say bye, and they'd come back 3 weeks later. And I started to notice something, and I asked the lab director, and because I had privy to tons of these tests. I'm like, I'm seeing the same thing on these tests. The most common foods everyone seems to be reacting to are dairy and eggs. And then the second tier are soy, corn, and peanuts. Now, it's a different test to look at gluten, which we were looking at too. And I was seeing a lot of gluten intolerance, which is an immune response. There's also celiac, which is, of course, a genetic response. So I was seeing that as well. And so as I'm watching this, I kept thinking, there was an elimination diet that's been used for decades, but it was so complicated. And I thought, why, like they've made it so complicated? I'm going to simplify this because we've got 3 weeks that happens between the test. And we knew if people came back and they had, even a couple of these showing up, and most people seem to show up with, eggs or dairy or both. They showed up with 2 to 3 of these. It meant that they had a leaky gut. This wasn't one of those types of allergies where you're sitting on a plane and someone opens the peanut, container and the person has anaphylactic shock. This is a delayed food response where you start to have any of those symptoms I talked about anywhere from an hour to a day later. And the reason that it's so missed is because it's delayed. So people have something and the next day they wake up and their joints hurt. They had gluten at dinner, their joints are swollen the next morning. They don't think, oh, it's the gluten. They're going, why are my joints swollen today? They don't connect the dots. So that's what this looks like. And it happens because of something called leaky gut. Your gut gets more permeable, which, crazy enough, a lot of that's because of gluten. Gluten causes the release of a protein called zonulin that makes your gut more permeable than it should be. Fructose, the most atherogenic sugar, most aging sugar that there is, does this too. And then so do a lot of different pain medications, disrupting your gut microbiome because of different medications, antibiotics, et cetera, GMO foods, artificial stuff can cause this problem too. And you couple that with people who are aging 35 plus under any kind of stress. So we've just pretty much named everybody. Now have lower stomach acid, maybe not digesting, breaking apart their food like they should, gets to the leaky gut, gets out into circulation, body goes, what is this? Launches an immune attack, creates antibodies to glom onto the antigens, the proteins from these food. It's the proteins that are causing the problem here, creates immune complexes. And if it was something you ate every once in a while, no biggie, your body uses macrophages, eats it up, spits it out. However, when you have it every day, even if it was a little bit like the cream in your coffee, your body then will build these immune complexes up and you'll have the headaches, the gas and bloating. It will land in places. So that's what it is. So, as I'm watching this, I go, all right, well, you know what? I'm seeing the same food showing up. We have 3 weeks in between when they get the test result back. I think I'll just pull the foods out. Like they need something to do anyway, right? So they come in, they take the test, and instead of just dropping the foods, I swapped the foods because what I learned early on, Matt, is if I just told them to pull out gluten, eggs, dairy, corn, soy, peanuts, first of all, what they would do is eat a lot of sugar. That's why I added sugar and artificial sweeteners. Also, because fructose, of course, makes the gut leaky. Sugar feeds bad bacteria in the gut microbiome. Artificial sweeteners disrupt the gut microbiome. So I pulled that out too, but I had to give them foods to eat. Now, 12 years ago, this was hard. There were not a lot of great options. Right. Nowadays, it's so much easier. I can't even believe it. It's just fantastic. I can easily tell them simple swaps for things like wheat tortillas or pasta, or cheese or milks. So life has gotten a lot easier. But I would take a symptoms check on all those things I talked about, take them, swap those foods, usually starting the day with a smoothie when they started their day, right? Pushing that a little bit later, but send them off for 3 weeks. And what would happen is they'd come back 3 weeks later. And the first couple of days were always rough, because if you have food sensitivities, you tend to crave the very foods that are hurting you. And so classically, cheese, bread, they were like, I can't live without it. I'm like, all right, you can get through it. It's just 3 days, 4 days. But by the end of the first week, the average person lost 7 pounds because they were getting rid of a load of inflammation. But more importantly, they lost the cravings that were controlling them. And they started to feel so much better. And I always say people would come in because they wanted to lose weight, but then all of a sudden their joint pain went away, their headaches were gone, they had better focus, right? And they're like, I don't want to touch that stuff. So they come back 3 weeks later, and we'd have the test results. And then what I would do is if the food showed up on the test results, we'd keep that out for at least 3 months, because sometimes you can heal the gut and they're able to eat these things, healthy versions of these things again. But what was interesting was I then would look at the other foods. Like, let's say that they showed up with eggs and dairy as a problem, but they weren't showing up with any issues with corn. We could challenge corn to see how they feel. But here's what I discovered with all of this is that, let's say you pull these foods out and you go back and you challenge the foods one by one, and you really check in with all those symptoms, and you watch your weight. Because if you eat a food that doesn't work for you, you know how sometimes you'll eat something and your weight goes up like 3 pounds overnight? I don't know if you've ever. Okay. You're not eating that many calories. I mean, you'd have to eat basically 10,000 calories for your weight to go up, 3 pounds overnight. So clearly it's not a calorie gain, a pounds gain. It's an inflammation gain. And that is when your food's not when your body's not responding well to something. So I kind of looked at this and went, unless we're really looking for outliers beyond those 7, I don't really see the point of testing, because isn't the best test how you feel when you eat something? If you eat gluten and your joints swell and your weight goes up 3 pounds, if you eat dairy and your face breaks out and you are congested, if you eat eggs and you're exhausted and your autoimmune symptoms kick up, why do we need a test for that? So that is where that whole thing came from. And, then it became the Virgin Diet. Which, by the way, I really had to argue with my publisher to name it the Virgin Diet. They were not keen on that.
Yeah, people who might not know your last name, they're like,
they're like, we don't know about that. I'm like, it's my name.
Totally. Well, that's awesome. That was a load of useful information there. I mean, one of the things I love the most was that you said, we don't drop it, we swap it. And so you give them direction on something that's suitable as a replacement, so they don't end up further down that pipeline. I also find it interesting how you said that there are certain foods that you don't necessarily have to say, look, I have an allergy to this, like a peanut allergy, I got to avoid it forever. It's not like that. I know people in the, like Dr. Ray Peat, for example, he'll talk about how some allergies to foods that maybe your average person might not be as sensitive to, like let's say a grass-fed butter or something like that, like an easier to process dairy. He'll talk about how sometimes it's because of a lack of total energy availability in the system, lack of energy in the mitochondria to be as resilient to that stress or insult to the body. So I find that interesting too, how some of our intolerances are not our destiny.
Right. Oh, they don't, and this doesn't need to be forever. This needs to be now, cool the flame, calm everything down. Like, one of the things that happens in 3 weeks is people start to feel what feeling good really feels like they establish, I don't want to say the new normal, because I don't know about you, but if I hear new normal one more time, I'm going to like bang my head against the desk.
Yeah, no thanks.
They find out what feeling good really feels like, right? And then we're going to heal. And so a big part of this program is what are the healing foods that can reduce inflammation, that can start to heal that gut, that can start to make you, how can we put some autophagy in there so we can get rid of the cellular debris, all those things, because you're right. Right now, if someone's having a food intolerance, it could be any variety of things. It could be due to stress, lowering stomach acids, making their gut leakier. It could be due to the GMOs. It could be due to pesticides. It could be due to they have too much of a toxic burden. There's so many different factors at play. And honestly, you never want to scare people off, but gosh, when you really start to dig into the food supply and the stress and the toxins, it's just a mess.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's one kind of thing that's ubiquitous across all of your books is avoiding some of those stress causing or inflammation causing foods. Speaking of that, I read an article of yours. I know you have a book on this too, talking about almost like an on-ramp into healthier eating, right? So some people might go for a traditional, orthodox, strict, whatever you want to call it, ketogenic diet right away. What I like about your approach is that you're very flexible with everything. And, with your sugar impact diet, you talk about how, a natural sugar that you might find in fruit, there's a distinction between that and maybe table sugar and some of these other things as well. So correct me if I'm wrong, but do you recommend if people are thinking about trying a ketogenic diet that they first start by trying your sugar impact diet as kind of an on-ramp to that to see how they do and maybe see if that's the main thing that they need in order to kind of shift into burning more fat?
Yeah, I do not believe in going straight into a ketogenic diet or straight into intermittent fasting. So to me, that's like you say, I want to run a marathon and you just sign up for one and go run it and you didn't train for it. Like if you were a couch potato and you're going to run a marathon, you would start by going walking and then you'd add some jogging and that, you know what I mean? You'd move into it. So I view the same thing here. I wrote the sugar impact diet because I had so many questions about sugar after I wrote the Virgin Diet. And it seemed like people were either in one or two camps or both. They were either confused. They were like, oh, but it's all natural. It's honey, it's fruit juice, right? Or they're like, I can't give it up. I just can't. And so I thought, we've been looking at sugar all wrong. And I was really wanting to dig into why are people controlled by sugar? Why can't they give it up? And as I started to dig into this, I went, wow, there's so many factors at play. And the reason I think people haven't been able to be successful in getting sugar out of their diet is because they tried to quit cold turkey. Now I view that as also like, let's just go do a ketogenic diet. Let's just go do this stuff. Sure, you could do that. And maybe you need to just go somewhere where they lock you up for a bit so that you suffer and you're, right? I mean, but there's an easier way to do it that's going to make it probably elevate your opportunity for success. And that is stepping into it. And so what I look at is, I think we've been looking at sugar all wrong. And it's not about eating no sugar, because when you think about it, all carbohydrates except for fiber turn to sugar. Right. It's a difference between whether you're mainlining it. That would be like, eating things like Cocoa Puffs or or Pop-Tarts or fruit juice, whether you're mainlining it like that, or you're making it slowly from foods you eat, like broccoli, Brussels sprouts. Matt, I once had a client who could not lose weight, went to the doctor. The doctor said, calories in, calories out. It doesn't matter if you're eating broccoli or Pop-Tarts. And I'm thinking, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, well, like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So, when I look at this, I think there's a couple things that we have to do. Number one, we have to help shift people's taste buds. So why are people craving sugar? Well, some of it is because they train their body to be a sugar burner, not a fat burner. So now they're reliant on incoming carbs all day long. They can't go more than 2 to 3 hours between meals, which is still this weird diet philosophy out there, is that we should be snacking to keep our blood sugar stable. Well, it doesn't keep your blood sugar stable. It drives your blood sugar up, which drives your insulin up. And eating all throughout the day, your insulin never has time to recover. So now you're inflamed. And when insulin stays high, you lock the doors to the fat cells, so you cannot burn stored fat for fuel. So that is silly. really what we want to be able to do is go 4 to 6 hours between meals. We want to go overnight, be able to go 12 to 16 hours without getting mean. We want to be able to miss a meal and go, oh, I forgot to eat lunch, right? You want to be able to burn sugar, but you also want to be able to burn ketones, and you want to be able to burn fat. And that does not happen overnight. If you're a sugar burner right now, eating every couple hours, if carbs are sneaking in, and probably are, and you're not even aware of all the crazy places they're sneaking in, right? And, you can't lose weight off your waist. It's so much easier to taper down the sugar impact and then transition so that you can easily move into a ketogenic diet, into intermittent fasting. So this looks like this. Number one, you check in with, where are you now? Where's your waist to hip measurement? Where's your body fat at? What's your energy like? What's your blood sugar like? How many carbs are sneaking in? I have people take a sneaky sugar inventory, because people don't realize, some of the stuff they're putting in, like marinara sauce, if you're not reading the labels, can have more sugar than Oreo cookies, all these, I'm being good and having a salad, and they had raspberry vinaigrette and glazed pecans and dried fruit. They had a sundae. That was not a salad. They had like 5 calories of lettuce,
My kind of salad.
Right? And 300 calories of sugar. You might as well just have gone to Baskin Robbins. So we check in with all of that first. And the first thing I have people do over a week is, number one, eat by the plate. If every time you're eating, you're getting clean protein, healthy fats, and fiber from lots of non-starchy vegetables, a little bit of slow, low carbs, you're getting really good blood sugar balance from that. And the protein and the fiber slow down stomach emptying, keep ghrelin suppressed, so you're feeling fuller longer. The fat's triggering the release of neuropeptides to tell your brain you're full. So you're having, this slow blood sugar rise instead of a big jack up that raises your insulin. You've got that control. Then you start getting a lot of fluids in between meals. So you're, quite often we're not hungry, we're thirsty, right? You're doing more sour types of things, because sour takes your sweet tooth away. And the first week I have people take from high sugar impact foods to medium sugar impact foods. So they're doing some simple things. Like if you were drinking juice, you're eating a piece of fruit instead, right? So if you're doing dried fruit, you're having whole fruit. So simple little things like that. If you're having white bread, switch over to a sourdough bread. So simple things that lower your sugar impact, but you're eating by the plate and you're kicking out the snacks and you're getting yourself a 12-hour overnight fast. That's the first week. Then the second week, for 2 weeks, I drop fructose down to as close to zero as possible. We take out all fruit except for tomatoes, lemons, and limes. And because fructose, the more you eat it, the better your body gets at transporting it straight to the liver. And if there's not space there to convert it from fructose to glucose to glycogen and store it as energy, it gets stored as fat. And you know what? Just assume it gets stored as fat. I always say glucose gives you fuel and fructose makes you fat. And along the way, it creates insulin resistance, raises triglycerides. In fact, if you want to induce hypertension in lab rats, you give them a lot of fructose. So this idea that you're having that great green drink, thinking you're doing something good for yourself. Well, if it was a lot of the green drinks at the store, there's one brand that in 16 ounces is 44 grams of sugar. Why? Because it's a green colored drink. And yes, there are greens in it, but the predominant juices in it are pineapple and apple. Apple juice is more fructose than high fructose corn syrup than a Coke. So, wow. Yeah, crazy. So during those 2 weeks, we're retraining your taste buds to appreciate spicy, sour, savory, umami, salty. We are getting you to put in some intermittent fasting, shorten that feeding window. We're doing some caloric variability. We're getting your body to be able to start using fat for fuel. So you'll know you can do this because you can go 4 to 6 hours between a meal. You can wake up and not have to eat right away. And we're teaching you that if you're a little hungry, it's okay. Like I remember like 20, 30 years ago, Matt, we were trained in school, never let your client get hungry. They need to snack all throughout the day. I'm like, what? Like, why? If they get hungry, then they'll go out of control and I'm like, this is so crazy. We need to
go on a rampage.
Right. And Joel Kahn had this great saying, hungry equals younger. It's like, it's okay to be a little hungry. 5,000 years ago, we got hungry. we should be getting hungry. You should know what real hunger feels like and it goes in waves, by the way. So you're hungry, you have some fluid, walk away, it'll go away. So that's the next 2 weeks, is getting that fructose down. And then you go back and you start to check in and eat, different levels of sugar impact food. I have them rated as green, yellow, red, to see where you feel good. I mean, how's your weight? Like, what I want to get people to think of is use diets therapeutically. There was a cool survey that was done in the UK, and they found that the average person stays on a diet for 5 weeks, 2 days, and 43 minutes, which I was like, that's very specific. But all of my programs are written, and they've always been this way, where you are your own nutritionist. You are going through a process where you're really kind of detoxing and resetting to find what feeling good feels like. And at that point, you can start to connect the dots. I think of it as really activating that intuitive GPS. They talk about intuitive eating, and I'm like, well, if you're eating sugar and gluten and dairy, don't think you can intuitively eat, because you've got food cravings that you'll think, oh, intuitively, I need to have that cake. It's like, no, you don't. That's your gut microbiome misbehaving, right? So at that point, you can start to really listen in, and then you're at a place where you can connect the dots and go, wow, when I eat this, I don't feel good. This crashes my energy. When I push breakfast to a little later in the day, I feel better. I can do a fasted workout in the morning, and man, my energy is so much better. When I stop eating, I know, like, one of the worst things for me is if I eat after 7 o'clock at night. I like to eat around 5, 6. I'm thinking, gosh, I'm like, the blue hair special now. But man, when you eat after 7, 8 o'clock at night, it is really challenging sleeping. I track my sleep with an Oura ring, and you can totally tell that you messed your sleep up.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on that one in the past, and more recently I've come to realize that it does make a difference. Absolutely. I think, speaking of this too, so you talked about, bridging into things like potentially like a little bit of fasting, keto. What I really appreciate about your approach is that it's flexible. You talk about kind of like another nutrition consultant, Danny Roddy. He talks about nutrition being this ever evolving, and your health habits, your lifestyle being this ever evolving thing that's kind of like building a quilt over time. One thing I think that's very interesting is, once you get into kind of a little bit more of a fat burning mode, one of the benefits is having ketones in your system. So I was curious, for me, for example, like, we've heard a lot of the benefits of having ketones in your system, like energy, metabolic health, brain and cognition, so on and so forth. For me, one of the biggest surprising ones was that, and they just did a study on this, that it actually can reduce anxiety by as much as 40% too. So I was curious if you had maybe either your favorite and or a surprising benefit of, having the presence of ketones in your system.
Well, I have something that's really different, probably because of my experience with my son. So when you have a traumatic brain injury, one of the challenges is your brain doesn't get the energy it needs because glucose is having trouble getting across the blood-brain barrier, but ketones they're able to. So one of the other things that happens when you have a traumatic brain injury is that you've got a shaggy brain, where your brain now, you have a higher risk of having seizures. And as we know, before we had any anti-seizure medication, we had the ketogenic diet. I mean, 1,000 plus years ago. So that's why I always laugh when people go, ketogenic diet's a fad. I'm like, this has been around for centuries.
Yeah, fads that last since, the early 1900s, sure.
Right. I mean, it's just like, let's look at why we're using these things. So those are where I see it's interesting, is like, in the case of brain injuries, man, this is a really important therapy. And in the case of seizures, the thing to look at is, it can also be, so I always look at the other side of these things too, is it's not always, while it might help with anxiety, and that's cool that the study said it also can have an issue with, especially I see this more in women who are stressed, that it can actually create more problems for them. So I think with all of these things, they're all tools, and that's how we have to look at these. One of the things I wonder about is do diet authors write books that are the book that worked for them, and then they think it'll work for everybody else?
Yep.
And, we all have our hammer. and nail, right? And so, there are so many tools, and that's why I think we need to look at these things. If you're having gut issues, if you're having autoimmune issues, hey, figure out your food intolerances. Let's look at that. Let's heal your leaky gut. Let's balance your microbiome. If you're having unstable blood sugar, if you've got issues with any cholesterol issues, pre-diabetes, any of that, hey, lower your sugar impact. Let's figure out what's working there, and then go in and trial ketogenic diet.
Right.
So let's look at what's the right thing for you at the time, because of course things differ. And so a ketogenic diet, like, you're pre-diabetic, you're not able to lose weight, go through virgin diet or sugar impact diet, start trialing out a ketogenic diet and see how that works for you. It may be the perfect answer. It may be a perfect answer for a specific period of time. I like cycling these things. Like, I'm not a fan of a long-term unless you've got seizures, a ketogenic diet. But I also think most of the time we go through a diet, we connect the dots at the end, we figure out what worked well for us, like what did we learn here? And then we bring that into our daily eating plan. We stabilize. And then when we look at where our next goals are, then we look at what diet might get us there. Or maybe the next goals have to do with stress and meditation or exercise or whatever. Focus on one thing at a time. I love the book Gary Keller wrote, The One Thing. Look at your health as a continuous journey. And that we have so many tools. We have all these different dietary tools. I mean, we've got fasting and intermittent fasting and ketogenic diets and, the autoimmune protocol. I mean, there's tons of really amazing diets out there that you can trial to see what you can bring into your daily life. All sorts of different exercise tools and meditation and life, stress tools. So one thing at a time, based on what's the big priority in your health, and then go on to the next.
Yeah, I really like that. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of just the simple Ralph Waldo Emerson quote about choosing principles over methods. And there may be a method or a tool, like a hammer, that you use for a period of time, diet wise. And then from there, you might borrow some principles in that. And it's almost like you're using more of a chisel in the big picture, even if now and then you have to bring out a hammer or a saw or something that's a little bit more black and white. One other thing that I wanted to bring up too, I want to be respectful of your time here, is I think something that sort of gets lost on a micronutrient level when people start to eat healthy is things like salt and electrolytes wind up getting demonized. In your opinion, how important are electrolytes and what are some of the benefits?
Well, I just invested in Element. So that's the electrolyte drink that the whole theme is get salty. So, here's the thing, like, it is just crazy how salt has been, like, sea salt and salt are not the same thing. Table salt is junk. Table salt is the white bread of, of salt. Sea salt is a nutrient. It's therapeutic. It's got so many great things in it. So for the last, I think, 15 years, I've been having people add sea salt, especially if they have any adrenal issues. I remember 20, 30 years ago, it was like, oh, anyone with high blood pressure, it's sodium, and it's like, okay, not in most cases. It's probably more insulin resistance and inflammation causing problems. But I think we've got to get really clear. I think the public gets confused between salt, sodium, from things like, crappy, dirty processed foods, and clean sea salt and all that it has to offer. Yeah. So especially with adrenal issues, man, it can be a game changer for you. So that might be, if you are, I just found hot yoga. I don't know where I've been. Like, I don't know if you've done this before. But
once or twice. I've done yoga for sure, but only hot a couple times.
So I mistakenly booked my husband and I into a class, not knowing it was hot yoga. And we walk in and we're like, I'm looking at him like, I need to get out of here. And he's like, sit down, and it was, not only was it hot yoga, it was packed hot yoga. It was like, sardines in a can hot yoga. But after we did that, I went, holy smokes, I need to do this more often. I mean, we use a sunlight and sauna at home, but boy, when you can sweat, it's so important. It's such great detoxifying. And then sweat and replace with something good like Element, like some great electrolytes, super key, important. And remember, yes, we should be drinking lots of pure spring water, so important for detoxification, but even slight dehydration, like 1% raises stress hormones. So
Yeah,
this is
very,
right.
yeah, that's so wild to me. And also just, I've read a lot more recently on, I mean, I already was a big believer in electrolytes and salt, but I hadn't really connected the dots on the adrenal or stress response time and how important sodium is to really just quieting a lot of the stress hormones in the body. So I appreciate you elaborating on that.
Yes. And I mean, I think this past year, like we should all probably get our adrenals tested, because if you were not actively, right, I mean, if you were focusing on the news and staying in the house and, not actively working against this one, you've got some stress in you. So
Yeah, it was, something to be proactive about for sure. And now, I want to be, again, you've been great. This has been an amazing interview. There's been a ton of nuggets for people to take away. If someone wants to learn more, they maybe want to read one of your books, check out, some of your latest and greatest information too. Where can they do that?
easiest is to go to my website, jjvirgin.com.
jjvirgin.com. Cool. And how about social media too?
Social media, jj.virgin on Instagram. We are, and then I have a podcast that is Ask the Health Expert. We're actually changing the name again. Do you know you can change the name of your podcast as much as you want? So I'm changing it to what my new book will be, JJ Virgin Anti-Diet. And then we are rebuilding my YouTube channel. So depending on when you're listening to this, it may be up there and redoing. We start new videos every twice a week here starting in October. And then I'm also have Pinterest. I have a free Facebook group, a JJ Virgin Lifestyle Community. So
awesome. Okay, cool.
Oh, and Medium. We write Medium articles every week too.
Oh, that's great. I read those. Perfect. I'll link to some of these, all these actually in the show notes. And then maybe we could have you again on sometime in the future when the anti-diet comes out.
Love to, for sure. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show, JJ. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into this one. I am very thankful to have had JJ on BHB Radio, and I will see you guys next time.